For you, it's 3. You're right.
You're 30 seconds closer to Eaton Surprise Sale Thursday.
Coming up next, Webster.
Good morning. Mondays are not my favorite broadcast days for obvious reasons. And least of all this morning, because there's one guy missing, Dr. Doug Kenny from UBC. I'm going to attempt to whip up some interest in the cuts in university funding. And later in the program, we're going to talk to Dr. John Gossage from the Royal Columbian, who is going to give me some views, you might say part 4 of my series on the shameful inaction and neglect in the treatment of children with diseases of the mind and severe emotional problems often connected with delinquency. That's John Gossage. In the studio this morning, not for light relief, but deadly serious, is Pat McGeer, the minister in charge of universities, as well as something called science and communications. But first off the top is George Pedersen. Poor George couldn't come in his tracksuit this morning because they're cutting back on track and field and football at S.F.U. We want to find out if he's got a valid case to scream about a piddling $1.5 million of which he is short, you know, and find out how many redundant courses and how much waste of money there might be at Simon Fraser University. And we'll start with George Pedersen after the break. Simon Fraser University has got 13,000 students, equal to about 9,500 full-time students. Budget of $70 million, and it's been slashed by $1.5 million by the provincial government. And here this morning is George Pedersen, the president of Simon Fraser University. Doesn't seem that bad. Can you get by in these times of stricture and exploding costs in all other ministries with a mere $1.5 million cut from your budget?
Well, I don't know if you've ever gone through the exercise, Jack, of trying to cut $1.5 million out of a $70 million budget.
No, I haven't.
You better believe that it is not the most pleasant exercise to go through. I should, before we go on, correct something you said. Provincial government has not cut our budget by $1.5 million. What we have found is that we have expenditures that have shown up during the course of this year that must be built into our base budget for next fiscal year, and they are in the amount of $1.5 million. Some of those come about as a result of salary increases. Some of them come about as a result of a shortfall in the grant that we got from the University's Council at the beginning of the year. Other factors such as postage increases and so on make up that $1.5 million.
But the only place you're going to get that $1.5 million which you need is from the provincial government one way or another.
Well, universities typically in Canada only have two sources. One is the government, and the other is whatever is brought in the way of student tuition fees. So those are the two principal sources of funding in Canada, unlike what is done in some other parts of the world.
And are you telling me you're $1.5 million short to stand still?
We are $1.5 million short to stand still going into next year's fiscal year, 1982-83.
All right, let's get the fees out of the way right off the bat. Can you tell me how cheap it is to go to S.F.U. and if you've been lax in recommending fee increases as people's wages have gone up and up and up?
Well, if the point you're making is that fees have not kept pace with inflation or with the grants, that is in fact correct. However, you're also probably aware that politically that's a difficult kind of thing to get through any university, and for a number of years Simon Fraser University had no tuition fee increases at all, and I think the same was true at the other two universities. The fees are relatively common across the three institutions.
Are they too cheap?
Well, that's a straight value judgment you're asking me to make. We can go all the way from a British or an Australian system where there's no tuition fee at all, but that entry is relatively restricted, to the fees that one has to pay at Harvard at the present time, which are of the order of $7,000 for 3 quarters. So, you know, that is strictly a matter of policy as to what a particular political constituency thinks is appropriate.
Mind you, in times of desperate need, you might consider putting the fees up. Have you put them up this year?
They've already gone up 23%, and we have a proposal before our board now to have consideration given to differential fees for foreign students. Undoubtedly, that will be a controversial issue.
Now, 23%. Can you give me an average of the fee structure? I don't want to belabor it, but I'd like to know.
Well, ours are relatively common because we have very few of the large professional schools such as UBC. At the present time, it's $330 per semester, and a typical student load would be 2 semesters out of the 3 per year, so $660. The increase that's proposed, or that's already passed, as a matter of fact, is moving that to $810.
Up to $810. Now, of your students, and I said, what, 9,500 equivalent full-time, right?
Yes.
13,000 head count.
Yes, we have a very large complement of part-time students at S.F.U.
How many of them are non-residents of Canada?
At the undergraduate level, about 10%, roughly 1,100 students.
They should pay more than the locals, shouldn't they?
Well, there are clearly 2 points of view. I have recommended that there be a differential fee. But I should tell you that philosophically, I don't agree with that. I think there are good, strong arguments for having international students at a university. I'm not going to go through them all here.
No, I don't have to. If you've only got 10%, it's not too bad.
No, that's relatively high for a Canadian university.
It is it?
Yes.
You don't deny any residents entry because of that 10%, do you?
We typically don't deny entry, but what is starting to appear now is we are getting high demand in certain areas such as computing science, business administration, where entry is going to be restricted on the basis of performance, on the basis of grade point. So it may well be that someone would want to argue that because an international student got in due to a higher grade point, someone else was restricted who was a national.
Yeah, it doesn't seem quite fair. In some ways, if you've got a preponderance of non-Canadian students in some of your faculties.
Right.
But you don't have.
We have a preponderance of our foreign students in certain departments.
Computer science.
Yes, those are the
Commerce.
those are the high demand areas on the part of everybody. That's almost universal these days.
All right, now, is there any prospect of you getting this $1.5 million additional you need?
Well, we've already approached the government for an additional level of assistance of the order of $850,000. I know the minister made an effort to try and get that for us and was unsuccessful. Similarly, the University of British Columbia sought $7+ million in the way of an additional level of assistance.
Precisely what are you going to be faced with cutting, so we can understand it clearly? Because the only thing I've really taken notice is your football team. It somehow or other doesn't cause tears to course down my chubby cheeks.
Well, it may not cause tears to run down your chubby cheeks, but it's causing tears to run down a lot of other people. We've had something like 140 phone calls about the dropping of football, and not very much about some of the areas on the academic side that are being cut back.
Naturally, you feel uncomfortable about that. How much are you going to save by cutting back in track and field and football?
About $150,000.
In fact, you have a good team which has done very well.
Yes,
to be quite fair.
On the Canadian scene, our football team has probably been as successful as anybody's.
What else are you going to cut?
We are cutting the major part of the track program. The other major areas of cutback involve, we have a reading and study center, which had in its employs 7 people. We are reducing that to a single individual who will move over into the counseling area. There's a saving there of about $150,000. We are not renewing the contracts of 5 lecturers in the English department. There's another $150,000. The rest of the cuts, I don't think it's useful for me to go through them all here today.
But to a total of?
To a total of $1.5 million.
$1.5 million.
That's right.
Will you really suffer? Now, for instance, does anyone look over your shoulder from the universities, whatever you call it, and say, you've got redundant courses, get rid of them?
Well, the redundancy question is a legitimate one to raise. I'm hard-pressed personally to know where the redundancy exists, and I'm not trying to duck the question or the issue. But if you look at the university system in British Columbia, of the 3 universities, clearly one has a more mature status than the others in the sense of having a much wider and better balanced program. The 2 younger institutions clearly are relatively adolescent, and I'm tremendously hard-pressed personally to know where we've got redundancy. That isn't to say we might not have a small department here or there that it doesn't have quite the enrollment we'd like it to have. But in general, we have high demand in almost all areas. We have the highest faculty to student ratio of any of the three institutions, and frankly, I don't know where the redundancies exist.
Well, your people got to, who got the 17% arbitration award?
In our case, there was a total of 17%. In the case of UBC, it was 21%.
Yeah, but who was it? Was that for your faculty?
That's for our faculty.
Was that too much?
Well, too much. If you look at where faculty are relative to other occupational groups over the years, they have fallen fairly impressively behind. Too much is strictly a relative kind of issue.
I know that UBC...
I mean, it was too much for us to deal with within our budget. We had budgeted 12% plus the normal increments they get, in other words, 15%, and clearly we had a 2% shortfall there.
I know that UBC have the highest level of faculty salaries in Canada, I'm told. How does S.F.U rate?
We will be at just about the same level, but I think you have to be a little careful when you start using those data and factor out the regional differences in cost of living and so on. If you do that, we're not an awful lot higher than the Canadian average.
How many employees do you have up there, faculty and non-faculty?
Roughly 1,500.
So your payroll must be quite immense in your 70 million.
In any institution like that, the payroll will constitute roughly 80% of your costs. So anytime you start talking about reductions of any consequence, you're talking about reducing the number of employees.
So you're faced with cutting your 5 lecturers, I believe. You're faced with trimming back your football and your track and field and putting up fees, and you're at the end of your tether. Will the university...
No, I'm not at the end of my tether, and despite what is reported, I am not bitter about the situation.
Oh, you said that. Pedersen bitter at
I've seen that 2 or 3 times, and I don't know where that perception comes from. I'm obviously disappointed, and I'm anxious about my institution, that it fare well. I did bring along a few visuals. I don't know whether you want to have a look at those.
Yeah, no, we'll have a look at them. I hate visuals.
I know you do.
You bring them, I'll show them, and if anybody else can understand them, it's a bonus for you. And then we'll do a short segment, then we'll bring in the Minister of University, Science and Technology.
Fine.
What kind of guy is he?
He's a good guy.
Is he?
Yes. He should get us more money, but basically he's a good guy.
Gets lots of money for the hospital at UBC.
I'm not commenting on that one. You can comment on that one.
After the break. George Pedersen of S.F.U insists on showing you his graphs, prepared at vast public expense. Bring up number 1, selected items, and he'll lecture us on it.
Well, all I want to do, Jack, in showing these is to illustrate what I think the really major problems are that face the 3 universities in terms of shortfall. The first graph shows what has happened to us in terms of inflation. The first line up there gives you an indication of what the operating grants from the government has gone up in the period 75 to 80. Some 46%, as opposed to salaries up 49%. Then the remainder of these items, and I should qualify by indicating these are Ontario data and not ours because we don't have them, but nevertheless the selected items we've compared have shown us to be higher. So if anything, I suspect, although couldn't justify at the moment, that the graph lines would simply be longer. And in any case, all of those factors are up. We got to heat up 150.
Hold that for a second.
Heat up 150%. You got periodicals up 100, you got books up 75%.
Right. Let's see that graph from the top again, that one there. You're going, is it rolling? Yeah, recure. I want to see that. I want to see the student growth in detail, because when did the S.F.U start?
1965 with 2,500 students.
Is it that long ago?
Yes.
17 years ago, it just seems like yesterday. Okay, here's the growth one on the students. Growth in student headcount at Simon Fraser University. Yeah. You're now at just on 13,000.
That's right. Now, we've been growing roughly 6-7% per year over in recent years. And, you know, that's an important factor in the kinds of shortfall that we've been having. And I guess one of the things we're going to have to look at is the possibility that we will be limiting enrollment somehow.
Okay. Next one. Operating grant.
Well, this is an indication of the operating grant and the extent to which it has dropped off. If you look at the 77-78 high point there, if you compare that to what has happened 81-82, the cost to us in real terms is something of the order of 10%.
Just a minute, you mean real terms, you mean balanced dollars?
In constant dollars.
Constant
our
dollars.
budget is down 10%.
The value of the money you get is down 10%.
The amount we get per student in real terms is down 10%.
Okay.
The proportion of the domestic provincial product that we have received has dropped from about 0.8 of 1% in 1970 to about 0.7 in 79-80.
Okay, next one.
Well, this is, I guess, the final point I want to make, and that is it's tremendously difficult and frustrating to be talking about cutbacks at the present time, when in fact all of our indications are that there are probably higher manpower demands showing up in the next 10 years than has been the case since the 1960s. The shortage of engineers, for example, the shortage of forestry people are going to be such that, you know, I would argue that the economic and social development of the province is going to be hindered by not being able to respond to those increased needs.
Oh, I think that could be accepted. There was a time, however, was there not, George, when we seem to be going, generally speaking, for too many academics, too many unemployed BAs we used to hear the shouts about. S.F.U. is not guilty of that. S.F.U. is more towards the science and the degreed skills.
No, I wouldn't argue that we have more in the way of professional schools. Obviously, we don't have as many professional schools as UBC does. But I think that the mythology about the unemployed PhD driving, or unemployed or taxi driving PhD, it was just a lot of mythology. I didn't find, and the evidence when it was checked out showed that that was not in fact the case. There may have been some people who went from universities and didn't take the first job that they thought they ought to have received, that they were underemployed in their eyes.
Dr. McGeer is Minister of University Science and Communications. How do you plead?
Jack, I didn't bring along any graphs, but I can tell you one or two figures which I think the public should be aware of. First of all, when we became government, the grant to universities was $162 million. Last year it was $313 million.
That's down in real dollars.
Yeah, almost double. And, you know, I say, well, that's some cutback. When we became government, the grant per student, now this is what the taxpayer pays. Remember, governments have no money of their own, was $4,280 per student. It's now $7,640 per student. And I can only say some cutback. But there's been a lot of rhetoric over the years about cutbacks. I've done my best as minister to get money for higher education in British Columbia, and I think we've been successful. So successful that I offer a challenge and a prize right here on your station, and I will offer prizes to journalists, $100 each.
Oh, big deal.
Out of my own pocket. Big deal. If any reporter can discover a country in the world that has done more for its universities than has Canada in terms of public money as a percentage of the gross domestic product being given to the universities. That's the first prize of $100. The second prize of $100 goes to any investigative reporter that can find a jurisdiction in Canada that has treated its universities more generously than British Columbia, with one exception. I've got to make an exception.
Go on.
That's Alberta, because they recently gave $66 million as a capital grant to the universities. And we've put our universities on a debt basis instead of pay as you go. We put more money into capital than they have, but we didn't give it in one chunk. And the third prize, Jack, is for any reporter that can find professors in the top universities of the world, Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, that are better paid on the average than our professors are here in British Columbia.
Best paid in the world on the average.
No, I'm just saying better paid than the top universities, because we've had all this rhetoric about how we've brought academic ruin in British Columbia, how mediocrity is coming and so forth because of penny pinching by the provincial government. And my response is to offer these prizes personally. And Jack, I'll double them for editorial writers of the Vancouver Sun and the Vancouver Province, because I know how difficult it is for them to deal in facts. I'm urging academics and they're not eligible for these prizes. I'm giving them to reporters. You can ask, you can be the referee, and I don't think the professors need the prizes. Maybe the reporters do, but I'm urging academics and the research staffs to give support to the media in trying to find areas in the world that have been better treated than British Columbia.
That's hyperbole.
It's not hyperbole,
It's dramatic
Jack.
Political hyperbole.
No, Jack.
I'm willing to believe.
These are prizes for factual reporting.
What do you make of that, George? Is it just political nonsense?
Let me just try and respond to one or two of his items. First of all, on the question of the proportion of GNP that Canada spends on education, I suspect it would be worth a reporter doing a little bit of work on that one, because my understanding, although I haven't looked at current data, is that Sweden might well be ahead of us, but if they are, they're only a nudge ahead. But it might be worth the effort to get the $100 off Dr. McGeer. But it is true that Canadians typically have been very supportive of the educational system over the last 25 years, and in fact the performance with respect to the development of a large university system in that period of time is relatively phenomenal.
Yeah.
OECD took a look at education in Canada a few years back, and that was one of the comments that they made in their report. They made another comment, however, that was more damaging, we could talk about another time, and that was they couldn't find any national policy for education in this country. The second item on the question of on the treatment of BC universities, I have publicly acknowledged, and I'm quite prepared to acknowledge Dr. McGeer's efforts in this regard. He has worked hard on behalf of the universities in trying to deal with his cabinet colleagues and his Treasury Board colleagues. And it is true that in relative terms, British Columbia universities have been well treated compared to other Canadian constituencies and to American states. However, our argument still remains that it's a question of what sort of priority you put on education. And it's been well demonstrated over the years there is a high level of correlation between standards of living and the extent to which you invest in the educational system.
Would you agree on that?
Yes?
On the third question on salaries.
It is true that I think if you look at salaries, that our salaries will stack up reasonably well with almost any university constituency in the world. I would suggest, however, that in looking at our salaries, you do have to take a look at cost of living generally in British Columbia. And if you do that, we're not nearly as well off as the figures tend to show. I think it's a bit inappropriate to make the comparisons with the good private institutions like the Princetons, Harvards, and so on, because having worked in a similar kind of institution, I know perfectly well they pay relatively low salaries, they have a lot of status to sell their people, and they allow their people to do a lot of consulting. So in terms of income, I don't think that you would find that those people are necessarily low.
Let's try and get at them another way. I have a strong suspicion that there is much duplication and waste of money in your community colleges, which have grown like topsy. And I have a strong suspicion that a place like the OLI, the Open Learning Institute, doesn't deserve the kind of support it should get if they are shot in our better parts of our better universities. Wouldn't you agree?
The OLI.
What the devil does it do?
Open Learning.
I've never been able to find out.
Open Learning Institute
Costs you millions.
costs very little, and as you know, I'm extremely proud of it because it brings education to the student and into the living room.
Is this the correspondence courses?
These are open learning institutes. It means you don't have to have prerequisites, you don't have to attend stand-up lectures. The educational system is brought to you. I'm extremely proud of it, and I consider these the best educational dollars we spend in British Columbia. It's a bargain.
Just off the topic for a moment. It absolutely infuriates me when I find you're giving courses for travel agents in community colleges. Apart from basket weaving and all that garbage, travel agents.
Well, I'm not going to discuss the general question of community colleges. You had my colleague Brian Smith on your program last week. You should have asked him about it. But when you start on the OLI, you've crossed the line, Jack, because that's the best bargain. That's the best bargain the public of British Columbia gets for their tax dollars. Remember, governments have no money of their own. And what we're talking about here is the public money. And how much of it goes to the university? You know, there was a press release, and I like to see the universities well treated. But when they begin to complain after that good treatment, that's when I react. We had this suggestion supported by the editorial writers in The Sun and the Province, about the bitter taste of hard times. There are hard times in British Columbia. There are taxpayers with the bitter taste. They're without jobs. They've got to make their mortgage payments. But if you've just had a 21% increase at public expense, that's not the bitter taste
You're
of
talking about
hard
the faculty
times.
award at UBC.
You bet. That's why they're in difficulty.
He's got a good point there.
Now look, Jack, let me come back to another point. We have given, as a government, over 97% of the money that has been requested of us by the Universities Council since we became office. We have given over 90% of the money that's been requested of us by the universities.
Good. Are you telling me that neither S.F.U. nor UBC has the slightest complaint to make when they're so well paid and so generously treated by the government? That's what you're saying.
No, I'm saying that the money that was asked for has been given. There are very few ministries of government do as well as getting 90% of their requests. I don't know a single one. But I'll tell you this, Jack. We try our very best to give money to universities. But if you have an agreement entered into by the administration of the university and its faculty to have some arbitrator award more money than the government has given, and 21% increases are awarded, yes, you're going to have financial difficulties. The pie is the same size, and you decided to cut it into larger slices, there aren't going to be enough pieces to go around. But don't blame the taxpayer for that.
I get the point, and George Pedersen and you can respond too on the phones after the break. We are getting down to the nitty-gritty on this. I think we'll go straight for it right now. Do you have you have a faculty association?
Yes, we do.
And you have faculty members, and you have the university. How do you settle your wage increases? By a binding arbitration?
Yes, we do have a third-party binding arbitration possible.
So you're stuck?
Yes.
So naturally...
But I mean, I fully appreciate the position the minister is taking on this. However, you should recognize that almost all faculty associations across Canada have some form of third-party resolution.
But an arbitrator means an automatic 18 to 21% this year. Do you encourage this binding arbitration at S.F.U. and UBC? Now, was it a panel at UBC or a one-man arbitrator?
It was one man.
What's his name?
Bird.
What did he give them?
21%. You see, that's...
21% in 1 year?
That's right.
In one year?
That's right.
So he sits down, they can't agree, and he says 21%, and the salary bill goes up a fifth.
That's right.
Okay, but you better just sort of dissect that figure a little bit, to be fair. That figure comes about as a result of an 18% across the board, plus the normal increments that are in the system. That is, there are increments that are
like
allowed to people,
teachers.
like school teachers, and so therefore, you know, from Bird's point of view, I'm sure he would argue that he's granted them 18%.
What you're telling me, therefore, is it's not the government's responsibility, excuse my finger pointing, it's the university's responsibility for going in unwisely into a situation where they're going to get hammered by an arbitrator for vast increases. What would you rather see?
All the money's there. It's been voted in the legislature. They know there is going to be no more. The arbitrator gives it away and says, you can all have a bigger slice of the pie, fellas. And then suddenly they find that there isn't a slice for everybody.
But you're the trustee for education. You're the boss. Let's not kid ourselves. Are you going to let this continue? Another 21% next year? Staff's reduced, more money for fewer people, fewer students, decline in education. Are you going to allow this to continue?
I don't think it can continue indefinitely, but it has been our historic position, and it continues to be our position, that the universities have autonomy. We also give the universities, Jack, the right to set their fees at any level they choose. And while grants in the past 10 years to universities have gone up 313%, during that period, fees have gone up 65%. So the universities, while they want to have these high salaries for their professors, and in a way I don't object to that, after all, I'm
one of them.
I'm one of them.
You're one of them.
But the students, they're paying less and less, and the taxpayers are expected to pay more and more. But what really makes me angry in this past week or two is all of these press conferences, the rhetoric saying the bitter taste of hard times, when in effect these people have made a mutual agreement to help themselves to 21% increases, when there are 100,000 people out of work in British Columbia, when the taxpayers are having difficulty meeting their assessments, and the mill rates to pay for education, hardship, 21% increase.
How about
see what it's like to be on the green chain and out of work.
Well,
There's got to be some consideration along here for the people who are
remarks?
packing the mail.
I'm with you. Are you making the same remarks to George Pedersen with his 18%?
Well, I'm saying to the universities that there is a responsibility that goes outside your walls to the tax-paying public of British Columbia. I throw the challenge out to the media because I think it's their responsibility to say whether or not our institutions are being well or badly treated. Now, Byrd, when he made his award, he never compared our professors to those in Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard and Princeton and
Look at
Yale.
the Vancouver Price Index.
Our professors don't live in Oxford, Cambridge, or Yale.
And to the high school teachers and the transit workers and others, Jack, in the public sector. But the ones that provide the funds for people like George and myself, and for the transit workers, and for the hospital workers, and the school teachers, they're the ones in the private sector that earn for British Columbia.
Can you respond to him at all, or is his case quite unanswerable?
No, I don't think his case is unanswerable at all. I think what he's saying, if you tease out the bottom line in the argument, is that the universities have been irresponsible in allowing a third-party resolution of salary matters. I think the facts are that our professors ought to have similar kinds of opportunities that exist in other parts of Canada. The minister at one time made the decision that our members of the university teaching faculty could not be considered under the labor code of this province. That's under the Universities Act. So consequently, they are limited in their sort of collective activity they can take. The facts are, in Canada, the bulk of faculty members are members of unions that are organized under some form of labor code, and typically they have some kind of third-party resolution on these kinds of things. We are simply making that provision available to the professoriate. You know, it's a pretty normal kind of way of dealing with an employee group. What's unfortunate is that the arbitration awards have come in unusually high this past year, and that focuses all the attention.
That's right, and we are now in a recession. I mean, your government's up to its ears in trouble financially. You're going to be down between $700 million and more next year. But you've allowed this because you can't possibly interfere with universities, can you? Well, they're going to be allowed to cut their coat according to their cloth, reduce the number of students, reduce the number of faculty, and downgrade educational standards.
But there is no evidence at all for that. If all it is required to produce academic excellence is money, we should have the top academic excellence in the world here. Because the money has gone. Well, I'll leave that for others to judge. They're not flocking here from Oxford and Cambridge. Jack, I will say this, however, in defense of our university administrations, and that is the professors have not been the cutting edge. The arbitrators that have come in have looked at other aspects of the public sector and have said, our academics deserve the same. Now, it just happens that the whole of economy of British Columbia is between a rock and a hard place right now. We've got militant unions in the public sector.
25% of the BC GEU, Hospital Employees Union, will almost certainly be on a limited strike by the end of the year. Where does it all end?
Okay, the private sector has to lead in British Columbia because that's where the money is earned. And if you can't make it by selling your lumber, just as Detroit can't make it by selling the cars, everybody's got to share that burden. But you can't take the ones that are in the softest nest, claiming about the bitter taste of hard times. They're not in the real world. The ones that are in the real world are the ones that are on the green chains. The ones that are bringing the earnings to British Columbia.
I've always thought of you as being in that unreal world myself. I mean, you're going back shortly. You won't be running again, and you'll go back to your cushy position at your lovely new hospital out there, won't you?
I'll make my contribution in improving the health of people, hopefully. That's what I'll be trying to do.
And exactly the same argument would be made by any other professor in our universities.
After the break. Dr. McGeer is in an unusual mode today. He's defending the workers against the greedy professors who's grabbing another 18% of your budget, 21% of UBC's budget. Do you find this a little distasteful?
Well, it's not clear to me at all why anyone would want to argue the position that all of the burden of inflation ought to be borne on the back of employees of universities. If you look at the Byrd decision and also, to some extent, the award that was granted our professoriate, the argument was made that relative to other comparable groups with whom comparisons have typically been made in the past, that the professor has lost his position. If you compare professor salaries, for example, to public school teacher salaries, they're well down over that period of time. So
But it's a soft touch being a university professor, isn't it? 6 hours a week out at UBC, right?
I've always maintained that the top academic is the most valuable man in society, because not only is he the one that brings new discoveries that improve our life, he's the one that trains our leaders for tomorrow. So that the top academic, you get your value and more. I don't disagree with George's point. That the arbitrators were merely saying, hey, these guys deserve the same as the others got. But wait a second. There's a flaw in that whole argument. And the flaw is, what the others have been getting has all been in the public sector. The private sector is the one that has to carry the mail. They're the ones that have to live in the real world.
Well, even they're getting $22,000 under the new contract or something?
If they can get a job. And this is it, you see. The people who took the 21% and were complaining about the bitter taste of hard times, they've got tenure.
I know that.
They've got tenure.
I know,
and
they're
so
there forever.
And
it
so,
can't be touched.
And so, Jack, do the ones who work for the government in the public service.
After 2 years.
They've got
After
tenure
2
after
years.
2 years. You don't get that on the green chain, and there's got to be some more parity here in British Columbia.
Is it fair to say that you're a lame duck minister?
No.
Is it fair to say
Provoke
that
me and I might run again.
No, you won't run again. I mean, you're far too busy with your brain research. Some people say you need it, but that's beside the point. Hard-nosed question. You're obviously greatly perturbed by this arbitration clause between faculties and administration.
No, I don't see it in isolation. I see this as part of a monstrous problem that exists in this province. We've got to come to facing reality in British Columbia, and these arbitration awards that have gone to people all through the public sector, these are more than the taxpayers can bear. And there's got to be a restoration of balance.
You're going to bring in legislation to prevent binding arbitration in universities.
Not I.
Would you like to see it?
I'd like to see the whole system altered so the private sector gets back to the position of leadership that is required for a healthy economy. And you cannot treat the universities in isolation. Yes, they're between a rock and a hard place. They shouldn't be complaining. They should be saying, thank heavens we got equity with the others.
Okay, George, we'll go to the calls. Any good calls coming up, Gladys? Go ahead, please.
Yes, I would like to direct a question to either Dr. Pedersen or Dr. McGeer in regards to foreign students.
Carry on.
Why is it that foreign students in British Columbia are allowed to pay the same fee as paid by Canadian citizens when throughout the world, in many of the universities, students from foreign countries are charged the full cost?
Okay, Dr. Pedersen has already tackled that a little bit, have you not? And you would like to see a differentiation, more charge for non-Canadian students?
Philosophically, I would not. However, we've got a fiscal problem we have to deal with, and one of the ways we're proposing to deal with that is to add a differential for foreign students.
Double?
Double over 3 years, 40, 30, 30.
Dr. McGeer, what are your views on foreign students getting the same rate as Canadian taxpayers' children?
I think educating leaders, future leaders from other countries, particularly ones that are less well off than our own, is the best investment Canada could possibly make. The numbers of foreign students in our universities are very small. And
George has
therefore,
got 1,300. 1,100.
He's got enough, and there's a particular group from Hong Kong there that would justify, as an exception, perhaps some adjustment being made there. But looking at the broad categories, particularly with our graduate students, we're making a good investment as Canadians. We're exposing our own students to a more cosmopolitan atmosphere. And remember, everything you learn in a university isn't from your professors.
Okay, got
so
enough.
that we're making a good investment. We need these foreign students because they enrich our lives and they make our future better. We should be doing it.
Even Libyans?
Well, you always choose the tough ones, and I would think Libyan students and Iranian students would find tough sledding in any North American university.
Go ahead, please.
Should be aware ours is restricted to
Morning, Jack.
undergraduates only.
Oh, undergraduates.
I'd like to put aside for a moment the figures that we're throwing out. Every time I hear figures from the government, they're different according to what arguments they want to use. I'd like to find out, first of all, I would say that the funding problem at the universities is a result of small underfunding the last 4 years. I'm wondering what the universities are going to look like in 4 years' time if this continues, and relative to the cost of the high unemployment in BC this will cause, which is going to cost more, an education system or the economy of BC that doesn't have proper education?
Can you answer that question?
Well, I think there's one answer that should be given to this young man who's probably a student.
Yes, Sam.
And that is, the students in British Columbia are getting one of the best deals in the world. There are other places that give tuition free, as George has mentioned, but they limit that to a very small cadre relative to our own. And there are many students in our universities today that if tuition were free and the system of Australia, I've been down there to look at it, were put in place, they wouldn't be allowed near the universities and wouldn't be given the opportunities that university students have for upward mobility later on.
You mean-
Our fees, not only are the doors wide open, but the fees are continually decreasing as a percentage of the cost of education. The taxpayers pay more, the student
You'd
pays
like
less.
to see them go up, instead of 65%, up 300%.
Well, I'll tell you this. If the student fees had kept pace with the cost to the universities would have more money even than they're asking for now.
True or false?
Well, that's clearly the case, but there have been increases put forward each of the last 3 years. What I think Dr. McGeer is referring to is a period of time in the late 60s, early 70s when there were no increases at all.
One short segment with my two highly intelligent educators after the break. Yeah, wish I was at UBC. I could give the same lecture every day. I've got to do a different one every day for 90 minutes. God, some of these guys have a real soft touch. Tell me some of the professors out at UBC stop in the middle of the page, and the next day they open at the next page and read their book.
Oh, Jack, you've never even gone out to check that out. You should go out. Just think of what an enlightenment it would be
Well, I'm
for
jealous.
you.
I only go out to talk about ethics to legal students.
Well, I've often told people, just go out to the university on a Saturday, on a Sunday, on a holiday, on Christmas Day. Look at the parking lot, how many people are there at work. Then go look at the parking lot at Macmillan Bloedel. Go and look at the parking lot in any of the downtown office buildings. Go and look at the parking lot in some of the plants, and then tell me who's working.
I absolutely refuse to burst into tears for your macadamia nuts, academia friends. Go ahead, please.
Too long in Hawaii.
I'm quite disturbed by the cutbacks in the English department and the Reading and Study Center when every year we hear about the literacy problems in British Columbia and the fact that students in public schools aren't learning to read and write properly, and when they get into universities they don't have these skills. So now what can these people do?
Okay, let me just try to respond to the reading and study question. This was a center, by far the largest of any in Canada, where students could go to get assistance with their reading habits, with study habits, with writing tests, so on, that kind of thing. And in general, I'm sure all of us felt it was a good service. However, we found upon further investigation in recent years that the people who are taking advantage of this are not the students who are having the problems, but are better than average or average students.
Well,
and so consequently, while it is certainly true that it was an important service, we felt that in our priority that it was a place where we could be cut back.
Dr. McGeer.
I don't think the university should be mollycoddling people that have not cut the mustard in high school. They shouldn't get through the doors in the first place.
Well, then do something about the education in the public schools and the literacy in English in public schools.
But boy, how I tried. And I think we've had some turnaround in the elementary grades. There's still a deterioration at the secondary school level. I noticed the University of Toronto has made a proposal to have entrance examinations for freshmen. Who fought that the hardest? Why, the Secondary School Teachers Association of Ontario. They're the ones that fought that. No, the job should be done in the high schools, and the university shouldn't be doing remedial education.
Teachers in British Columbia have fought any kind of testing for years and years and years and years. Don't you?
You bet they do. But on the other hand, the universities have it within their power to demand standards. I'll tell you this, you don't have that kind of nonsense at Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard and Yale and Princeton. They don't do any corrective English. You know how to do your work before you get out there. You don't get through the doors.
Should we have that kind of system? An elite only going to university?
I think it's an unfair kind of comparison. Obviously, what Dr. McGeer is identifying are the major international institutions. There are a lot of institutions in the UK and in parts of the United States that are comparable to the kinds of institutions we have.
I'm sure their literacy standard in British schools are no higher than ours nowadays.
Yes, but they have the examinations, you know, the O-level examinations. There's no nonsense about it. And I'll tell you how you get excellence in our universities. You demand it.
Go ahead, please.
I'd like to find out if the football program at Simon Fraser University is completely gone, or is it just the scholarship fund that is gone?
No, the recommendation that has gone forward to the board from me is for the abolition of the football program. That is by far the largest program we have in athletics, and the feeling was that if we had to cut back, it was the appropriate one to cut back at this time. But I do want to emphasize that's a recommendation. It is not going to be acted on this month, but rather next month. There is an opportunity for everyone, both within and without the university, to tell us how wise or unwise we are, or how unwise I am in my recommendation.
Well, if you don't abolish that, it's obvious you're going to have to abolish something else.
That's right.
Go ahead, please.
I was wondering how $1.2 million could be allocated for the construction of a faculty club, given the current financial situation at S.F.U.
I've answered that question so many times now, and I'm glad to have an opportunity to answer it on air. We get money in three different ways. We get money for our operating budget, we get money for our capital development, and we get money for capital equipment. Those are non-transferable categories. We cannot move money from one of those to another. And the money that is being utilized to develop what I think is an important facility at the university is coming out of our capital. We would not have the opportunity or the right to move those funds over and alleviate our operating budget. Furthermore, if we did, we could only do it on a one-time only basis. It's the recurring part of the budget that's the problem.
And you approve of the faculty club must have one. UBC was lucky enough to have the Kerner family.
The Kerners gave it. Jack, I honestly never even knew that this, I should have known, well, but I didn't.
On priorities, BC Hydro is spending $1.1 million on a new cafeteria downtown. They need that, of course.
Again, I sit on the board of BC Hydro, and this is the first I knew of that. But then there's no excuse for a director not being thoroughly familiar with what goes
I'll
on.
tell you, they've got to move the cafeteria from the present place because the water pipes may burst and ruin the computers. But in your other one down in Sears Tower, you've got 1,000 employees and no cafeteria, but they're spending $1.1 million. But you've robbed us of that $100 million anyway on the water license, so you've got the money to spare.
Let me just say a word or two further, if I may. Our club, which is to be named after Jack and Sadie Diamond because of a major contribution they made toward it, is not restricted to faculty. It is open to membership of other employees of the university and students if they wish to pay the tariff.
Gentlemen, I must get on to the important business with Dr. Gossage. But I've learned a fair amount this morning, including your absolute abhorrence of this binding arbitration between universities and faculty associations. Abhorrence.
And in other sectors,
Injustice.
Jack. Because
and in all public sector unions.
That's
you
correct.
want to crack down on people paid out of public money, they must follow the private sector, which is suffering, and not lead it.
That's right.
Oh, you should win the next election and run away. I'm very grateful, George Pedersen.
Thank you very much,
Sorry, Dr.
Jack.
Kenny couldn't make it this morning. Very grateful, Dr. McGeer. Would you like videotape dub of this program. No charge.
No charge. Now you're talking.
Dr. Jack Gossage, John Gossage, after the break. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of last week, I did 3 reports on the bureaucratic confusion, the problems, the ministerial indecision involving the treatment of children with severe mental problems, often associated with delinquency and crime, and also those with diseases of the mind. And by the time I had interviewed Dr. John Duffy, the director of the Forensic Psychiatric Services Commission of British Columbia, we had established quite clearly that there's a new broom in the province, and that the Maples, with its 26-bed secure unit, will be open and in full operation within 4 months. And that this particular operation of the Maples, I also told you some of the problems at the Juvenile Detention Centre, where at least 10% of the 60-odd youngsters there at any time should not be there because they're not getting the treatment they need. I particularly asked Dr. Gossage, who is the director of the child abuse team at the Royal Columbian, British Columbia, and has been deeply involved as a consultant to the Ministry of Human Resources on child protection, risk factors, and all the rest of this very important subject. Do you feel easier in your mind now, Dr. Gossage, that we've finally got a decision after the psychiatrist's withdrawal of services and all that nonsense, that the Maples will be in operation shortly under the full control of the medical profession? Is that going to assist in coping with the problems arising from your particular investigations and expertise in this field?
I wish I could say I had confidence. I hope so. But I have been around this province long enough now to have a certain healthy skepticism that I'll believe it when I see it. I don't think by changing brooms you necessarily solve problems. I think it's going to take a lot more than brooms. I think it's going to take attitudes. And I'm not sure on the basis of what I've heard that the attitudes are going to change.
I'm going to ask you what I asked Liz Watson and the 2 other lawyers the other day. As of this moment, where does British Columbia stand on a scale of 1 to 10 in its treatment of children who've come through the abuse route to mental problems or delinquency or whatever? Where do we stand on a scale of 1 to 10 now?
Well, I would agree with my legal colleagues who were with you the other day. I think it's probably 1 or 2, and that's perhaps being flattering.
Overly generous?
Yes.
What kind of problems do you face in handling this particularly troubled children who've been through some dreadful abuse experience and from there on got into further trouble?
Well, the problems we face relate to a real sense of knowledge of what these youngsters need, but an inability to translate that knowledge of what they need into the real world of treatment on a ongoing basis. I increasingly travel the province in the work I do as a consultant, and it saddens me to sort of hear the glib answers that are given about what is available in the province.
Well, we're supposed to have a network of services.
We're supposed to have a network, but you go to almost any community in this province and you find that network relates more to the attitudes of the individuals there than to the particular training skills they have. And I think I was remarking to you when we were preparing for this program about 2 small communities in BC very close to one another where attitudes are tremendously different and where the capacity to deal with these problems therefore is different. Has nothing to do with the particular training of the people.
Well, that was a point I think that Duffy was making the other day, that one of the problems in this province has been there's been a tendency to say this child must go into the Maples, this child must go into the JDC, the Youth Detention Centre, when in fact we totally lack, am I correct, any kind of local examination, referral, and then a final decision for in-treatment. Is that one of the problems?
I think that's true. We talk about the existence of local referral resources and that sort of thing, but when it comes down to the bottom line, I find that that's not true. And as I say, the solution seems to relate more to the formation of a network of professionals who trust one another than to a mass of psychiatrists or a mass of probation officers or a mass of any other kind of professional.
Well, I'm a little bit late in asking this question after I did the 3 programs last week, but do you feel that this secure unit at the Maples was essential and that we must have it for the care and treatment within custody of certain children?
Oh yes, I think such a facility is necessary. I noted as I was watching the tapes of Dr. Duffy that he was focusing very heavily on the definition of mental illness. I tend, probably through not being a psychiatrist, I can afford the luxury of being a little more freewheeling, and I tend to deal more in the area of kids who are very, very troubled, whether by virtue of mental illness or something else, more generally for a whole series of reasons. And I guess I'm worried that, I perceive anyway, that containment and treatment is necessary for more than simple mental illness.
That was the message I got from Dr. Duffy. I mean, I think I'm quoting him correctly when I say that I got the feeling that a concerned person on the outside, even a judge, far less a probation officer, might find it very difficult to get treatment in the Maples, in the cottages or in the secure unit, unless that person falls closely into the definition of a disease of the mind.
Exactly.
That would be bad, wouldn't it?
I think it would be bad. You're peeling one group off from a group that needs help. And my experience in the work I do is that, in terms of the children I see, most of them have a number of things going on, of which significant mental illness may be a part.
Tell me some of the problems you face though in the treatment of, I don't want any horror stories, but do you feel frustrated in following through on child abuse, for instance? How does the system work, if it works at all? How widespread is child abuse?
Well, I think everybody knows that child abuse is very widespread indeed. And in terms of the volume we see at the Royal Columbian Hospital, which is a busy child protection center now, we see about 250 new cases a year, of which they distribute out pretty typically according to the Canadian distribution, which is some 15%, 20% are physical abuse. We're now seeing 35 to 40% of our first contacts are sexually abused children. But the big message is that these kids come from intensely troubled backgrounds, and the end result is that a complex network of treatment services is needed.
What do you do with them just now? If you have a child from an intensely troubled background, and did you say 35 to 40% sexually abused?
That's correct, yes.
This is in-family abuse almost, more or less, is it not?
Yes, yes. Almost all that is by a person who is known to the child.
Therefore, you must take that must you take that child away forthwith?
Usually. Almost always. That is a judgment not made so much by myself, because I do not, in the work I do, hold the authority to apprehend. Quite correctly, the authority rests with the Superintendent of Child Welfare. But we judge each case on its own merits, and there is a very skilled network of persons, locally anyway, who are, I think, able to assist in the making of a wise judgment. I think where the problem lies is going from judgment, having a knowledge of the sorts of things that are needed in order to help that child and family, and finding yourself up against the stone wall of a lack of facilities, either because of lack of trained people or a bureaucracy which just won't let it work.
We're going to talk more with Dr. Gossage from the Royal Columbian in New Westminster, head of the child abuse team there and the consultant of the MHR, after the break.
Is that going the way you want it?
Yeah. The medical profession and others will be keeping a close eye on the reorganization of the BC Youth Development Centre, which is the Maples on Willingdon Avenue. But you expressed a fear, I want to put it to you again. This is now going to be under medical control with a medical director. Is that necessary? I like it because it's clean cut. Somebody at last is in charge. But is that good from your point of view?
I don't think that the medical profession always has to be in the driver's seat. I think that what is important here is that there is a line of authority. If, as Dr. Duffy says, this is going to be strictly related to mental illness, then I support the concept of a medical person in control. I guess my concern is, as I've indicated, that the kinds of problems we're dealing with are only partly mental health ones. And I guess I'm fearing that one small segment is going to be broken off in terms of the helping of these youngsters and leave a whole mass of troubled kids out there.
Yeah, well, see, Dr. Duffy's attitude, and he is, of course, I suppose, it takes a classic psychiatric approach, is that you can't treat adolescence, and that a child or a youngster will himself decide at what time he's going to go straight, and that perhaps some of the best things a child in trouble can do is to run, to get away from that environment. Is he right or wrong in that?
Well, if you can't treat adolescence, then I'm wasting a lot of my personal time. I do believe you can treat adolescents, or you can assist adolescents to treat themselves. I do not take a cynical view that you can't treat
What kind of
adolescents.
problems are we talking about in the adolescence that you're dealing with from
The
time
kinds
to
of adolescents I'm dealing with are those who probably would not fall in the definition of mental ill health, but they are youngsters who, by reasons of a combination of background and the environment they're moving in and some of their own ill-advised decisions, have got themselves into difficulty, whether it be with drugs, alcohol, criminality, this sort of thing, and many of the things that your panel of lawyers were dealing with the other day.
Does child abuse lead to delinquency in that child?
I certainly believe that there is every evidence that chronic emotional deprivation, child abuse, does contribute to delinquent behavior later on. I think there are many good studies on this, and the Senate report from the federal government, which you may be familiar with, has certainly addressed that and made it very clear.
You call it chronic emotional deprivation.
Yes.
If a child has been sexually abused at home or beaten about at home, this leads to great trouble in their minds.
It certainly can.
And into delinquency.
It certainly can.
Now, in your child abuse team in the Royal Columbian, do you have sufficient resources to handle some of these troubled youngsters within your system?
I would have to say only partly. Our team functions basically voluntarily and functions within the normal confines of a hospital unit. It requires to do a really thorough job, far more time on the part of the professionals than they have.
In other words, you get the child when the child becomes an instant casualty.
Yes.
You get the child as a casualty.
We're dealing in crisis intervention, and we know enough about families at risk now that we would love to be able to get in earlier and get into the more preventive side of things.
But how can you prevent that? If a family hasn't had its explosion and nobody has put the child's hands on a burning stove or abused it sexually, you can't act until you intervene in the crisis.
That's true, but we now know enough about families at risk, and a sufficiently high percentage of these are known to social agencies, whether they're known to the Ministry of Human Resources or the police or whatever, that I think that there's every evidence that those working in this field could get in much earlier and prevent some of these catastrophes that make the headlines.
But it must be a very brave next-door family which knows of abuse or sexual abuse or physical abuse who's going to call the authorities.
I would have said that 3 or 4 years ago, but you are well aware that the media and the public are much better informed now about the issue of child abuse. They are much better informed about the mandatory reporting that all of us as citizens are required to undertake. And I think that I have seen a change in that. I've seen a change in the willingness of persons to report. The helpline for children, which was
That's a good thing?
I think it's a very good thing. Basically, I have said before, and I'll say again, I think the minister opened a Pandora's box when she established that helpline and basically put in a marvelous storefront, but the problem is that the storefront doesn't match the availability of services on the inside.
You can get the calls, but you can't cope with the consequences.
That's right.
More with Dr. Gossage and your calls too after the break. But the reorganization of the Maples has got to be a step in the right direction, surely.
Oh, I think it's a step in the right direction. I hope it is not conceived, though, as an instant solution to a problem that is long-standing. I see it as a part of the solution, but just a part. And I will be very surprised if the staffing is at the point he said it was going to be at the time he said it's going to be. I hope you will do your 6 months review.
He's got 75 people to hire. He says he's already got lines on people, and he's going to have it going in 2 months, full operation in 4 months, and I can walk in any time after 6 months.
Well, I hope you will. Some of us would like to go along with you.
Might be a good idea to take a doctor with me so that I'm not conned. Not that I'm suggesting anyone would con me. Go ahead from Kamloops, please.
Yeah, Doctor, I'd like to direct a question to Dr. Gossage. I'm a clergyman, and it's frustrating for me when I see a family with a potential situation. There's nothing happened or there's not a lot of abuse going on, but I've turned to both MHR and RCMP, and it's frustrating when absolutely nothing happens. There's no help. Nobody's interested in giving help. Where do I turn?
It's like a broken record, isn't it? I am most sympathetic with you. I think that we have tended to underestimate the value of the family doctor in cases like this. Family doctors are interested and are in a position to deal in what is perceived as a situation of confidence with the families. They, in a sense, are not institutionalized, and I think they are able to approach these difficult matters in a sense of confidence with the family that a person who is regarded as part of Big Brother is not able to do so. And I really feel that we have tended to underutilize family doctors.
But the clergyman could go to the family's doctor and say, please, I'm concerned about this family, would you have a look at it?
I think that either going directly from the family saying you should see your family doctor, or if he knows them, calling them. I really think we underutilize family doctors in terms of this way.
Well, anything else, Minister?
No, that's a good answer to my question. Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack. I've been in the field of mental health and child care for 25 years, and I came to British Columbia in '74, and the situation here has been very concerning. Number one, I think Maples is a necessary facility for the flagrantly incorrigible youngster. But my question, and I agree with Dr. Gossage this morning, is what happens to the child that we see in the schools, the local hospital situations, the homes, etc., that don't fall within the Mental Health Act? They can't fit into this category. And prevention, as far as I'm concerned, is the big thing that we should be looking at around here. I think our priorities are really mixed up. I work in the penitentiary system, and I think we spend millions of dollars on that, and we spend very little on children or senior citizens.
Okay, hold it there, Dr. Gossage.
I agree with you, caller, and I suppose with advancing years I'm becoming cynical, but I really do not think children have a high priority politically, and so long as they don't have a high priority politically, so long as, say, Northeast Coal takes vast precedence over kids, I think we're going to continue to have this kind of infighting and this kind of divide and conquer mentality. I don't pretend to know what the solution is, but until professionals can stop fighting one another and until government can make a basic decision that children are of some importance, I fear that we are going to continue to have the same problems.
It's that bad, you feel, that our priorities for children after all these years and all these millions of dollars spent are still low?
Well, they don't become a high issue until you have an Olson case.
And by the way, it infuriated me to read that he's got 3 psychiatrists available for him. But that's another topic. Go ahead from Nanaimo, please.
Hello.
Yes.
Jack Webster.
Yes.
Yeah. I see your finger on the button, but I've been trying to get on your program for about 3 weeks.
Make your point.
Yeah. I just weighed 3 3/4 pounds my first year as a Scotchman, conceived in Edinburgh. And born in
I'm
Winnipeg.
delighted to know where you were conceived. That makes my day, precisely. And I'm grateful for your call. Now, either come to the point or...
Okay. I'm from Nanaimo. And I was at the bottom of the barrel as an alcoholic.
I'll have every...
And a chain smoker. I'm 71.
I am not an alcoholic. I am a
I
chain
didn't say
smoker.
you were. I just
I
said
wish
the
you the
chain
very
smoker.
best of luck, sir, in
Yeah.
your endeavors for your fruitful and productive life. How can I get on where he was conceived? None of my business. I'm not a peak freak. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm just wondering, I know of a certain incident here where there's been a child what I feel is been very neglected. I think she's about 8 years old, this little one is. That's a little bit too young to be left at home alone and so on while the mother is out carousing and drinking and all the rest of it. What is the legal age that a child can be left at home?
I'm sorry, I should be able to answer that question. I can't, but I know what is very clear, and that is if you, as a citizen, have reason to believe that a child is being abused or neglected or is in need of protection, the Family and Child Services Act makes it absolutely clear that you have a requirement in law to report. The Ministry of Human Resources will then investigate and decide on the validity or otherwise, but you have a requirement in law, and in fact, penalties exist for failure to report.
Well, I don't see how I would be subject to that because nobody knows that I even know, but it looks absolutely ridiculous to have, you know, any kid who can't cope with being alone type of thing.
Well, it's up to you to phone the helpline at least. Can he phone the helpline?
Surely, or his local Ministry of Human Resources.
Yes, when are you going to be placing numbers like that in the air as the show?
No, just phone up MHR.
Who's that?
Ministry of Human Resources.
I see.
And
And
if
they're
you
the
can't-
ones who take these complaints.
If you can't find it, phone us back and we'll get the number for you.
Oh, I'm sure I'll get it with our telephone book system. Thank you.
Bye. I think it's worth the trouble. Dr. Gossage, I'm grateful you came along this morning. A little disturbed. 250 cases a year in New Westminster alone?
No, 250 cases per year are referred to the Royal Columbian Unit. You're aware that we sit smack in the middle of the biggest population of kids in BC, and we are a referral unit, so they come from all over the place.
We'll be following this topic in detail. My thanks to Dr. Gossage, the pediatrician, head of the child abuse team at our Royal Columbian. I'll be back after the break. Canada's top postie, Michael Warren, tomorrow, 9 a.m. precisely.